Professor Jarvis, Lecture 3, Management and Human Resources, Marketing and Sales in Sport. Slide 1. What does HR mean? HR and human resources implies that people have capabilities that drive organizational performance. In human resources, sports organization is critically important and is the driving force behind any management model, not just in sport, but in management in general. Slide 2. Volunteers are a key component for human resources in sport. Many organizations have volunteers in place of structured payroll for staff. Lots of examples you'll see revolve around Special Olympics. And most importantly, Special Olympics World Games is being held this summer in Los Angeles. And they have a very detailed volunteer structure base and helps to offset their revenue, their expenses, for staffing a large event like that requires thousands of employees. Volunteer motives are something that we look at as well. A lot of people are attached to an organization because they might have had folks who have participated in certain sports. For Special Olympics, for example, many have relatives or friends that might have athletes with special needs that have participated and feel that they want to give back to the organization, and that motivates them to volunteer and give of their time. But again, volunteers affect the bottom line when we talk about business structure because it affects the offset of your expenses when you look at your budget. Volunteers essentially can replace some staff members and help financially in your bottom line. And your volunteers really can be your best asset at times. Slide 3. So when we talk about Special Olympics and community centers and college and professional organizations all utilizing volunteers, we see that in many events. Some events you'll see that are national events, some are local. Less attention might be given to those events, but the need is still there for volunteers to help an event run and to be successful. In addition to just Special Olympics, we talk about community centers, colleges, and professional organizations. If you talk to managers and folks who are in charge, you'll see that there are a vast number of volunteers that they require to run events and to offset their costs. Slide 4. So when we talk about paid employees and human resources, those are the people who you have on your staff. When we talk about interviewing techniques and what you say and how you conduct an interview and how you interview a potential candidate, there's questions that you can ask and questions you can't ask, but some of the interview questions you're going to come across or that you should be asking potential candidates would be, what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? Why would you be a great fit for the organization? Tell me an example of when your leadership characteristics were spotlighted. That's a big one. You want to make sure people have leadership ability, really no matter what level you're hiring them at. And then the open-ended questions about, tell me about yourself and about your family and about your passion for sport are critical for you in making a decision if they're going to be a good fit or not. Educational background's always important. If you're in a position where it's an upper level executive position, you're going to want to make sure and verify their college graduate certifications are in place and in order. And you want to look at past employment as well. And in the sport industry, it is a very small world. No matter what sport, what level of sport, most managers, people who are an executive level, know each other. Even though we are looking at a vast array of different sports, usually a phone call away is how a manager will be able to get a reference on someone who's applying for a position. And oftentimes, those references are given to employees on a personal basis. So past employment is critical. So leaving a position in a good way, leaving a good bridge is also helpful in you receiving your next position and for you accepting them into the next position as a manager. Slide 5. When we talk about interviewing candidates and what we're looking for in an employee, as a manager, phone interviews are always helpful if you have someone who's out of state or out of the country, in really seeing if there would be a good fit in the initial process. Gaining an idea of their background and their passion just over the phone will give you an inclination if it's worth to bring them out for an in-person interview. And that also helps with phone interviews if you have a large pool of employees and potential candidates. You can weed some out simply by phone interviewing, knowing the ones that won't fit. And getting to know the candidate is important, not just about the resume. The resume will tell you a story and a backdrop on the person, but getting to know the candidate and asking key questions. References are always really important. And sometimes there's a need for a second or third person to be in an interview and conduct a panel interview. That second or third person could ask questions that you would normally not ask. And it's nice to see the response from the candidate when they're asked a question from someone else. Slide 6. Every job should have a job description that details out the general overview of what the job entails with specific duties. Salaries and hours will be discussed upon the final hiring process. Those questions could be asked also in the interview process, and you can give a general idea of salary and hours. But the job description should have that laid out, and task-oriented and global goals of the position is important. Job descriptions are general in nature, and most often you'll see a disclaimer at the bottom of a job description that says anything also above and beyond the duties here are requested by the manager. That's always a nice way of saying anything that they're asked to do they should be doing. And that's always a nice thing to have. You don't want an employee who is only going to live by the job description and say to you at the end of the day that that's not my job. You really want a team player invested, and that's part of the interview process, is trying to weed that out and find the best candidate for the position. Most importantly, when you are looking at candidates for positions, take your time in hiring the right person for the job, but don't feel bound to keep them. You need to fire quickly if they're not the right fit. That means before they get invested and are able to sink into the position, and it's harder every week that goes by for you to be able to disperse their job duties over to somebody else. So if it isn't going to be a good fit, you really need to be able to fire them quickly and not to be afraid to do that. As a manager, it's really critical to be able to step up to the plate there. The wrong person can be a cancer to your organization, and you've got bigger problems on your hands then. Slide 7. Training a new employee. There's lots of different ways to do that. In your text, it talks about mentoring and shadowing, instruction, observation, interaction. Mentoring and shadowing is probably my favorite because it's actually hands-on, where they can actually shadow someone, and putting another employee or yourself in a mentorship role to be able to give them the tool sets to do their job well is really important. Instruction comes in with staff training or job description training. An observation of other employees is also helpful, and they should be doing that anyway. When they get onto the job, they should be wanting to learn how other people are doing and what they're doing. And then interaction with other employees where they can be mentored by their peers. Comes back to mentoring and shadowing is also a great way for them to feel comfortable and to get invested in their role. Slide 8. When we talk about leadership, there's different types of leadership. Frontline manager are those who are invested at the front line, as it describes, and are in the trenches with the staff. And then there's a supervisor over those employees who does a lot of the detail work, but also supervises the team. And then an executive is more of a global thinker and looks at strategy for the team and the organization. And then there's an owner. And owners usually are silent owners. You have some owners who are more involved, and the executives answer to the owners ultimately at the end of the day. When we talk about leadership in general, there's two different types of leadership styles to look at. One is transactional and the other is transformational. Transactional leadership is more of an operational mode and often uses incentives to motivate employees to perform, which is more of the day-to-day operational type of a leader. And then the transformational goes beyond day-to-day and crafts strategies for taking the team to the next level of performance and success. Focuses on team building, motivation, and collaboration. And by far, transformational leaders are more dynamic, really relate to their team members, and really develop relationships amongst the team. So if you have a choice of transformational or transactional leadership, transactional leadership is a little bit more dry, I'll say, and transformational leadership is much more embedded and well received. Slide 9. When we continue to talk about human resource management in sport, there are components to that in decision making, components of running an organization. There's participating pieces, and then there's autocratic pieces. There's advantages and disadvantages of each of those. Employees that participate in decision making feel invested. They also have a sense of pride. The autocratic form is a little different, and it is much more of a style of the bosses telling the employees how things are done, and both have their advantages and disadvantages depending on the intake and how it's received by the employees. In professional sports organizations, you'll see a lot autocratic forms of leadership, a lot of coaching styles. Coaches' backgrounds come into executive business meetings, and that's the way coaches run teams, and so that'll fall into how they run programs and also facilities and just sports business in general. You'll see many more of the participative pieces, those executives who have backgrounds in business, more of the human resources side. It's more of the warm and fuzzy side of it, but there definitely are advantages to both, and a blend between the both makes really successful organizations flow well. Slide 10. So in performance reviews for employees, there are a few things to look at. Tracking job performance. Usually there are employee evaluations that occur either quarterly, some occur semi-annually, and some occur annually. And those are professional evaluations, and those are formal evaluations. Most often it's a sit down and it's written. So there's an interview process to it, and it's written and documented. And that keeps track of employee performance year to year or quarter to quarter, however it's done. But that's the way to gauge how your employees are doing. Large organizations who have thousands of employees sometimes don't get to know employees on a personal basis, and this is a way for them to track and gauge performance evaluations. So the scenario that's on your screen talks about if you have an employee that's not performing to the standards of the company, how do you handle that? I like to tell people that documentation is key. You first begin the process of evaluating the performance, and then you give detailed areas of improvement with timelines. If the employee can't meet the areas of improvement within the timelines, there's consequences for that. And your consequences can range anywhere from suspension all the way to termination, depending on the severity of it and how often it's gone on. But again, don't be afraid to let someone go if they really don't fit into your organization. You really need to have people who do fit in and dig into the culture and the environment that you're working in and that you're creating as a leader. Slide 11. We shift gears here to marketing and sales. And we talk about proper marketing leading to sales and the need to keep the consumer happy. And how is that done? There's lots of ways to do that. And we talk about sports really is revenue driven, ticket based. Your customer are your fans most often. You have revenue streams from other sources, but a majority of it comes from your fan base. Slide 12. So what are you selling? Tickets and membership, luxury seats and suites. Depending on which arena, you're talking $50,000 to $350,000 per year on a luxury seat or suite at an arena or facility. And that's on the professional side. And the difference between luxury and standard is quite obvious if you've ever been into a sport facility. Standard seating at let's say the Staples Center is for a Laker game. Standard seating is going to be anywhere from $30 to $75 a seat. In a suite per night is ranging from $5,000 to $10,000 for a small suite, which seats, I'd say about 7 or 8 people. So the difference between them really is revenue. It's income. It's how much you can sell a seat for and what it brings. So the difference in the luxury is it's got a lot more perks. You have full service, you have bar service, alcohol sales is included in that. Oftentimes alcohol is included in the price for a luxury suite. And all of those little perks add up. Slide 13. When we talk about sponsorships, why is sponsorship so important to success of a franchise? There's a lot of ways sponsorship digs into the revenue, and it actually produces a lot of revenue. So sponsorships is a line item in every budget for a team, organization, or a facility. Sponsorships are big, heavy hitters, and there's a lot of examples of high-level sponsorships in sports. We talk about sponsorships. I would not do due diligence if I didn't talk about naming rights. When we talk about naming rights, it's the biggest type of sponsorship you can acquire. Naming rights go all the way up to 300 to 400 million, and those really range from like 20 to 35-year contracts, different than a standard sponsorship with just a team or a league, and those are usually seasonal. Oftentimes they have smaller level contracts between 5 and 10 years, but those bring in yearly revenues for teams. Naming rights bring in revenue for city, government, team as well, but it's on a much higher level. The benefit of sponsorship, we talked about increasing the revenue stream. And then why do sponsors part ways? Really, there's a perceived value that a sponsor has. And if they don't get that perceived value at the end of the day, they didn't feel it was worth it. And then there's general return on investment, shortened to ROI. And when we talk about the ROI of a sponsor, they want to know what they're getting, what's the bang for their buck. And you really have to detail out when you see how many views a sponsor's going to get for being on a billboard or on banners and signs and signage in an arena. You have to be able to translate that into dollars. So how many eyeballs hit a sponsorship ad, and then how do you translate that into dollars? And one of the biggest things that you'll see as we talk about sponsorship are Super Bowl ads. And those are very expensive. And what's the return on investment? Everybody's watching the Super Bowl, and everybody will see the commercials and the ads. And there's the return on investment. What are they going to get from it at the end of the day? They'll get increased sales, increased viewership. Whatever they're selling, the Super Bowl is the prime ticket in getting the sponsorship ad out there. So that's one of the keys for sponsors, and what they're looking for is perceived value and the return on investment. Slide 14. And then that's what they're selling. They're selling their product, and they want to be able to get as much as they can from their investment in you. And their investment, again, is going to be usually a smaller year contract. Sometimes it's upwards of 5 years, sometimes to 10 years, but usually it's a year-to-year lock-in, and they play it by ear. As they get their numbers at the end of each year, they'll see if they'll renew contract and see if they have what they received on perceived value. Slide 15. Advertising sales and sponsorships, purchasing ad space. Advertising is a little different than sponsorship. Advertising is usually a one spot or several spots, but sponsorship is more long-term for the entire season or year, and advertising are smaller end pieces. It's based on anticipated exposure. Again, being able to translate a return on investment is key. How many eyeballs are going to hit the advertisement, and how does that translate to them? Different ways to do that: TV, radio, print, internet, and social media are big. And then newly out are virtual advertising. So when you talk about virtual advertising, the NHL is testing virtual ads. In the NHL, they have dashboards where the home teams would see home advertisements and away teams would sell inventory of their home market. That was tested out also in baseball a few years back, Major League Baseball. It went pretty well, but now the NHL is attempting to do that to see if they can gain more exposure and get more people to purchase advertising sales per game. Slide 16. So the bottom line is there's big money in advertising. Sports entities rely on advertising in some way or another, and that's across the board in community, collegiate, professional, and Olympic. And that's something that is key for revenue streams for sporting organizations.